Wednesday, November the 20th. Lake level is right about 916, about the same as it was last week. Hadn't changed too much. Water temperature, I hadn't been out much at all since, I guess, Friday last week. I did go out for a couple hours this morning. But the water temperature is still 59 degrees. It hadn't cooled off very much. And what I did is I went out and was looking for some deep fish. And the wind blew pretty good, so it was kind of hard to stay on any open water stuff. But what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to show you what baits I will use, from this time of the year, pretty much all through the winter, as far as when I'm deep fishing. Now, I will throw a crankbait, an Alabama rig, and a jerk bait, but if I'm pretty much just deep fishing, I pretty much keep it basic. What I'll do is I'll drop shot. I'll use a little 4 or 5 inch grub, a Gitsit, or an ice fishing jig. Now my drop shot's kind of the same rig that we use, all summer long. I use a little circle hook, open hook, 3/8 ounce weight, about 16 inches from the hook down to the weight. Now I like to use, 6, no heavier than 8-pound line. A lot of times I will tie a swivel up here about 1 foot or so to help keep the twist out of the line, especially in the winter time. And I'll use a lot of that, you've seen it, that KVD Line Magic, or Real Magic is another brand. And I spray that on my line right on the spool in the winter time, and it helps keep the twist and the memory out of it. As far as the colors of the worm, a lot of the same colors that we throw throughout the summer. Little chompers will work good, a zoom. This is a chompers here. It's a brown purple laminated. Watermelon candy will work. Plum will work. This is a hand pour that Danger Close Baits makes. It'll work good. Now I usually just kind of mix it up to see if there's a color that they want. Normally this time of year when you find them fish, they'll be in this. Right now I'm looking in the centers of the creeks and on the long flat points and looking for the birds and the gulls, the loons. And what you'll find underneath them is big groups of shad. Now some days the shad will be 30, anywhere from 20 to 40 feet deep, and they might be over 60 to as deep as 150 foot. When they're up in that water column like that, seems like the birds are real active and the fish are active. Usually when these shad get over the tops of these submerged trees, see, they didn't cut any of the trees down when they flooded the lake. So most all of these creeks have got deep timber in them still. And what we're kind of looking for is when the schools of bait get over the top of these trees, the fish will come out and feed. Now when there's no shad there, you can go to these trees and fish them with a drop shot or a spoon or a Gitsit, but ideally it works best when the shad's up and they're active. And I have noticed the last few times out, if the shad's not up in the water column, I found them in 60 to 70 foot of water, dead on the bottom, and usually the birds are sitting on the surface, not moving at all. When the shad's up, the birds are moving, fish are usually active. If I don't get that kind of activity, then I go to the treetops and try to work these baits down in them. Now the depth that you'll fish this time of the year might be anywhere from 25 to as deep as 70 foot. You just got to locate the fish on your electronics and the shad. Now another thing I'll fish in the same area is the drop shot. I'll mix the drop shot up with a grub, a little 4 inch, sometimes 5 inch grub, Yamamoto, a Bass Pro XPS, chompers will work fine. This is a 5 inch I've got here. And depending on how deep and how much wind, what size head. Usually I like to fish it on a 1/4 ounce. If I'm getting it down there deeper and it's a little windier, I'll use a 5/16 or 3/8 ounce head. Now, I'll use a Gitsit doing the same thing. I use the same hook that I use on the grub. I just slide it, up inside the tube or the Gitsit, pull the hook point out and tie it. And the Gitsit I'll use usually a lot of the same colors as the grub. Like a smoke with silver or black flake, a salt and pepper just like that grub there. And this is kind of an off-white. And I usually like to use a 3 or 4 inch Hookset, not a real heavy tube like a flipping tube. It's more of a finesse tube. And you know, basically I'll throw 3 colors of the grub. It's the smoke with black flake, salt and pepper, and then a milky white. Usually between, you know, those 2 or 3 grubs and the Hookset, I can usually catch them on that. Now, if the fish get real active, a bait that we'll throw a lot of times is a spoon in amongst the fish, and you'll actually see when these fish are feeding on your electronics, you'll actually, we call it worming. You'll see the schools of bait, but you'll see the fish going up and down in the water column. And when you've got that, that's a good time to drop a spoon or a Rapala ice fishing jig. I usually use a 3/4 ounce spoon if I'm throwing a bait caster, and I'll use, you know, anywhere from 14 to 17 pound line. There's no reason to use light line with this heavy jig, with the heavy spoon or the ice fishing jig. Now if I was fishing it on a spinning rod, I'd probably be more apt to fish it on a 1/2 ounce spoon, you know, on 10 to 12 pound line. And I pretty much prefer on the spoon all white. The ice fishing jig, I've got a little white with the chartreuse I like. It's got a little chartreuse on the head. And this one's kind of a chrome blue. Now one thing I have been doing on the drop shot and the grub as well, I'm normally not a big fan of fishing any braid, but I've been using quite a bit of this nano fill that Berkeley makes, and I've been using either 10 or 12 pound line on the spinning rod, and then tying on about a 8 to 12 foot leader, fluorocarbon leader, 8 pound line. And when I tie that, I use a surgeon's knot to tie the 2 lines together. Now the good thing about using that nano fill or a braid, especially in the wintertime, you don't get any line twist. But that braid does fall a little bit slower, so you may have to go a little bit heavier jig head. And you've got awesome sensitivity on it. The thing I found is I got to set the hook a little easier than I do with the mono. Normally when I'm drop shotting, I use 6 pound mono. And when you're fishing 30 to 50 foot deep, you really got to set the hook hard because you got a lot of line stretch. You know, when you set the hook, you have to have the rod up over your head. Now with the braid or the nanofill, the only stretch you've got is in that leader. So you'll notice it doesn't take near the hook set, get a little bit better hookups. And I think with that fluorocarbon leader, I've been getting as many bites, and I don't have the problem with the line coiling on the spinning reel. Like I said, there again, especially when it gets cold. So, you know, next week I've got a pretty busy week because it's Thanksgiving week. Hopefully we'll get on some good groups of deep fish, or maybe even an Alabama rig, and I'll have a more accurate report, you know, of what the fish are doing, because like I said, I hadn't been out since Friday. So, but I think for the most part it's still pretty tough. I did find today I can still get bit on the docks. The problem is you got to get your baits way back into the stalls, way back into the slip, and it's still a really, really subtle bite. I know I've been saying this for weeks, but we definitely need that water to cool down, you know, get down into the mid-50s. That's going to help with the Alabama rig, wiggle wart bite, and also the deep bite. So, till next week, good luck, good fishing.